It used to be that people became chefs because they had a deep desire to cook, and even more than that, a deep desire to please people, to make people happy. Now there's a generation that sees cooking as a way to become a star. Those are very different motivations.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. I love food. From the most basic barbecue plate to a fancy tasting menu, I'm up for all of it. And my guest today is a journalist, producer, radio host, and author who has turned his attentions toward writing about the people and stories that influence what we eat. David Page is a food journalist and creator of the Food Network show Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Definitely one of my favorites. He's also the author of the book called Food Americana, the remarkable people and incredible stories behind America's favorite dishes. We cover a lot of ground in this episode, and I didn't hold back with the hard-hitting questions like, does pineapple have any business on pizza? And where should I go next time I'm in Philly for the best cheesesteak? David Page, welcome to A Joyful Rebellion, and thank you so much for being here today.
Well, I am joyful at being here. What could be better?
Well, what could be better than talking about food?
Being in the Carolinas to eat some barbecue where you are. I'm on the Jersey Shore, not well known for barbecue.
Where's the line where it gets interesting and where you just don't want to try it?
The line is only in an individual restaurant. There's great barbecue everywhere. The ongoing erasure of regional lines between styles ticks me off. On the one hand, I'm a brisket fan, so I enjoy being able to get Texas brisket elsewhere. But I always like the romance of going to where you could only get something. You know, I went to Memphis in May for my book a few years back and was just surrounded by whole hog, which is not something I got much of in the various places I used to live. And you certainly don't get it here in New Jersey. So that was a delight, absolute delight. But it bugs me that, you know, when Coors beer was not available east of the Rockies, it was a prized connoisseur's delight. Only when it became available did you realize it tasted like beaver piss.
That is hysterical. And you've done a lot of traveling because you've been a journalist for many years. You talk a lot about food. You've even written the book Food Americana.
Thank you. My daughter went 7 straight years at Columbia, back when it was known for education, not rallies. And I'm still paying that off. So buy 10 or 20 of those books for your next big gift-giving occasion. Go to Amazon. It's Food Americana. Did I mention it's Food Americana at Amazon?
It's Food Americana. It is. And talks about regional foods. Just like you were saying, it goes through Memphis. When did you start it? And how long was this journey before you had all of these stories compiled?
Well, the journey began eons ago. I grew up with a wonderful mother who was a lousy cook. The older I got and the farther I was from my childhood home, the better I did at eating things. But it really blossomed when I was sent overseas by NBC News to be a producer. I had never, ever considered the possibility of living anywhere else. And I was in the Chicago Bureau for NBC, got a phone call one day saying, would you have any interest in moving to London? And I said, sure. After which it was like 6 or 8 weeks before they told me I got the gig. So I ended up covering Europe, Africa, and the Middle East, first from London, then Frankfurt, then Budapest. And I was desperately trying to catch up with everything I did not know about every country I was being sent to. And it occurred to me pretty quickly that one of the best ways to gauge what's important to a culture, what its people feel like or would like to feel like, and what the history of the place is, by sitting down at a local restaurant and sharing some food with the locals. In Greece, for example, the meza, the small plates that are shared at a table, that's pretty indicative of a society that has always looked at sociability and interaction as a tremendously important element. The philosopher Epicurus, yes, there was one, and yes, Epicurean comes from that. He once wrote that when deciding what to do for dinner, it's more important to first decide who you're going to eat with than to worry about what you're going to eat. Because in his words, more or less, to eat alone is to eat like a wolf. And I'm not sure that's even true because wolves, as I understand it, travel in packs. But the point he was making was it's inhuman not to treat dining as a social experience. You go to Tuscany, and so much of what they're famous for is wild boar. Well, they're famous for wild boar because Tuscany was traditionally an incredibly poor, poverty-stricken place. And if you wanted to eat, you had to hunt. Now, you look at Strasbourg, which is in France, but the signature dish there is chacrut, which is a very Germanic plate of sauerkraut topped with pork of some kind, often pork chops and sausages. That German dish being the signature of the French city that is one of the capitals of the European Union reminds us that corner of the world was disputed, fought over, and changed hands between Germany and France for millennia. So there's a ton you can learn by immersing yourself in the food. Now, the flip side is we've had an influence on the world too. First time I went to Vienna, I asked our local crew of drivers, you fed late at night because of the time difference. You fed your story to New York between 11 and midnight. And I said, when we're done, if there's a place open, take me one of your favorite restaurants. So they took me to a Texas barbecue joint.
Okay. And how was it?
It was fine. I was disappointed. I was hoping for schnitzel or something, but it was fine. We've done our best exporting our version of barbecue. And there are, of course, other versions traditional to other countries, Mongolian barbecue, Korean barbecue. We seem to have been the ones who either invented or maximized whole carcass cooking over wood or coals. But I kind of stopped half story there. Bottom line is when I got back to the States, my interest in food continued and even grew until I left Network News, went to work for a home shopping channel, hated that, opened my own production company and wanted to make some television, and I couldn't sell anything. So I called Al Roker. Al was a friend of mine. He'd work with me. He had a production company, still does. I said, I'm starving. You got any work? And he said, yeah, I'm doing a lot of Food Network stuff. Let me subcontract some of that to you. And that's how I stumbled into food television. From that point forward, I guess I was known as a food journalist. You're whatever you were last in this business. I've been a control room producer, a foreign producer, a features producer, a morning show. You're whatever you did last. It's all storytelling.
But there was something about the food that drew you to that subject matter.
Well, initially what drew me to it was the opportunity. The only guy offering me any food work was Al. Now, it turns out that led to work with the Food Network on my own. So I've developed a reputation and presumably an expertise in this area. But it started by accident, as did the show. The diner started by accident. I was pitching the Food Network left and right, and I couldn't sell them anything. And this very kind executive who was taking my calls, I had done a documentary on diners for them through Al. And finally, this woman said to me on a phone call, don't you have anything else about diners? And I said, oh, yeah, I'm developing a show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. And I told her all about it. And for the first time, she expressed interest. She said this was like a Thursday or Friday. And she said, get me a one-sheet, a write-up for a 1-hour Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives special. Get it to me Monday. We have a meeting on Tuesday, a development meeting. So I did and ended up buying a special, and that turned into a series. So when she asked for a diner's pitch, I just pulled that name out of thin air, or a body part, if you will. And now I'm a food guy.
Now we know how it all began. That's amazing.
That's how it all began.
And for sure, one of my favorite shows on Food Network. I love to go in and see what the regional foods were going to be. Not only that, but the creative spin that so many of the diners would put on it. So you would go in and think, oh, okay, this is going to be another burger. And then you'd see what they put in it that the locals absolutely loved. And then you were thinking, oh, gosh, I've got to try that sometime.
Well, the only thing more regional, there's 3 foods that are regionally, that have developed large regional branches, if you will, in America. Burgers, hot dogs, and pizza. Each of those items has a regional or often a local analog. A Chicago hot dog is quite different than a New York hot dog, and they're both terrific.
And people get really defensive of their style of, like here in the South, in Carolina, there is a Carolina version of a hot dog. It is a standard mustard, chili, onions, and slaw.
Is it Texas chili or is it Greek chili? Is it sweet and cinnamony?
It is not.
It's Texas chili.
It is Texas chili. It is savory. It is very fine ground meat.
You realize the original chili, which is still the best, does not use ground meat. It was
Right.
originally made out of pieces of beef.
Beef.
Peppers, no tomato, lots
Right.
of cumin, lots of garlic. But there's a great book out. It's been out for 60 or 70 years called A Bowl of Red that includes LBJ's favorite, allegedly. You know, his wife apparently provided his recipe. And what's interesting is the key ingredient in early chili recipes was suet, which, if you don't own a parakeet, is beef fat. Yeah, so there's a whole hunk of suet put in at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Good for your heart.
Really good.
No, but a real chili, I mean, chili should not have beans. Chili should not have tomatoes. It should have beef, fat, peppers / spices, and then you should go home and take a nap.
Yes, exactly. And maybe check your blood pressure.
Well, that too.
That too.
I had a diabetes scare a few months ago, so I've lost 80 pounds, which has limited my ingestion of beef fat to some extent.
All right. In America, we're a country of immigrants, and so many people have come here from other places, which has influenced the food.
The whole premise of my book is that there is an American cuisine created from evolved and modified versions of dishes first brought here by immigrants or consumed here by Native Americans. So I like to say that we evolved our cuisine from the cuisines of other countries and cultures.
Yeah.
And we evolved them. I mean, look, when the poorest of the poor came here from southern Italy in the 1800s, they were shocked to find out there was a big difference between being poor in the U.S. and being poor in Sicily or Calabria, which is the poor here could still afford meat. The poor in Italy could not. I mean, that was just teeth-grinding poverty. Pasta was only a once-a-week dish on Sundays. Here, you know, the term abbondanza, abundance, that's why what we think of as Italian-American red sauce food is so heavily filled with beef or pork. Sunday sauce, for example, that didn't exist in Italy. A marinara sauce existed at best, or just some tomato put on top of a piece of dough, and if you were feeling rich that week, you would throw on a piece of lard or an anchovy.
Wow.
We modified the hell out of it.
And then we kept Americanizing it. I guess bigger is better.
There's nothing wrong with that. You know, I hate it when people say you go to a Chinese restaurant, someone says, well, this isn't authentic. Authentic what? It's perfectly authentic Chinese-American cuisine as it evolved from the Cantonese cuisine first brought here by Chinese gold miners and, more importantly, the merchants and restaurateurs who came here in the mid-1800s because of the California gold rush. And that food started to evolve, A, because of the availability or lack of availability of ingredients, and B, as Chinese restaurateurs tried to broaden their customer base, they found out pretty quickly there was an awful lot, especially offal, you know, body parts in Chinese cuisines, and there are many because they're regional, that Americans just weren't going to eat, which is how you got chop suey, for example, which was the first big allegedly Chinese dish to take America by storm. And to this day, there's an argument over whether it was a variation on a dish served in China using internal organs, or a dish made up here in America, but whether it was made up or modified, there was no internal organ happening in this dish. It was beef, pork, or chicken, the first American basic change in what the Chinese themselves would have cooked.
And that was pinned to a certain time in history, but also in ways, certain regions. So I've got a question about the modern day quest for food in America, because if you do watch the Food Network, any kind of food shows, it's really chef centric. It's about the creator, the creation, and it's also about the farm to table movement, which is what I see. But as a journalist, I would imagine that you see 2 levels deeper the general public does.
We could do 12 hours on the concept of celebrity chefs. It used to be that people became chefs because they had a deep desire to cook, and even more than that, a deep desire to please people, to make people happy. Now there's a generation that sees cooking as a way to become a star. Those are very different motivations. And frankly, the gussying up of dishes that are just fine the way they are is kind of an absurd
Yeah.
cry for attention in many cases. You know,
Right.
every New Year's Eve, there's some story about the $5,000 dinner that comes with Grand Cru, blah, blah, blah. Come on, that's crap. We should be focusing on good food well made by talented people.
That's well said. I appreciate that because good food is really great without all of the hype.
Yeah,
And
look, you look at tasting menus. Just about every restaurant on the much criticized 50 best restaurants in the world list, they're all tasting menus. Nobody eats a tasting menu, really. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want a tiny bite of something and then give me something else. But that's become the standard, especially at places that have chef's counters.
I tried one of those just recently and I was like, I got a brisket sandwich about 2 hours later because I said, you know what? I am hungry.
I had that same experience with my wife at 11 Madison Park back when they were still serving real food as opposed to just vegetables. And it was a $2,000 meal and I was hungry when it was over. Now, the flip side is there are $2,000 meals that I would argue as a rare, rare, rare special treat, actually all worth it. Linea in Chicago. I was lucky enough to eat there as a guest of the chef, which didn't hurt. Guy Savoy in Vegas, of all places, which last I checked had 2 Michelin stars. The Guy Savoy in Paris has 3. But we were taken to Guy Savoy in Vegas by an agent when we were out there pitching a show. And he took us to dinner, which is a tasting menu. It blew my mind. If you're going to spend $2,000 on a meal, I highly recommend it.
Okay.
Now, but the fascinating thing is when we were eating, was it there or I don't remember if it was at Guy Savoy or Alinea. Halfway through the tasting menu of these molecularly bizarre dishes, he brings out a course, I think it was Ackett's, he brings out a course of beef done the way Escoffier did beef when he was inventing French cooking. Just kind of like if Picasso, during his Cubist or Blue periods, had brought out one of his early realistic portraits to say, I can do that. That's easier than what I'm doing now. And that was a fascinating, down-to-earth moment. Now, this in a meal where stuff was smoking and it was bizarre. And at the end of the meal, the dessert is they bring out a large plastic tablecloth. They put it on your table. And then, in this case, the chef himself, in other cases, I guess the waiter, they've got squeeze bottles of chocolate and raspberry, and they're just throwing all this dessert onto your table to be experienced like you're finger painting. It's just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
That would be a wild ride for sure.
Oh, yeah.
When you were working on the book and traveling around to all different places in country, food is so intertwined with the culture. Is there a specific place where you thought, oh my gosh, this is where the food and the culture, kind of like the way you described Greece?
Yeah, there are 2 dishes representative of that I alternate between for my death row meal. And that's either lox bagel and cream cheese from Russ and Daughters on the Lower East Side of New York, or tenderloin and sausage from Miller's Barbecue in Taylor, Texas, which are perfect examples of perfect art forms.
How so?
Well, I hate to do it on a numerical scale, but is the lox good? Yes, the lox here is a 10 out of a 10. Was it sliced properly? Lox must be sliced very thin with an impossible to maneuver long blade. Yes, it is. Are the bagels as good as they can? Well, ever since Russ and Daughters started making their own bagels, they're up there with the best of the bagels in New York. The cream cheese is the highest quality cream cheese with the highest fat content I've ever seen in my life. I just want to rub it all over my body. Louis Miller's manages with simply salt, pepper, and great knowledge of how to smoke to make the finest brisket I've ever had. Now, I have not eaten at what's-his-name's place in Austin, Franklin Barbecue, which is supposed to be so Humpty Dumpty wonderful. Okay, but he's using prime beef. The whole concept of barbecue was to do the most with the worst. So many great cooking cultures are of response to poverty. I mean, no one ate chitlins on purpose originally. And actually, that's not true. That's not true. Let's use another example. No one ate pig innards, most pig innards, but they're great if you grind them into sausage. We're one of the few cultures without a real history of making sure to use all part of the animal. Barbecue started out in butcher shops when beef started to go bad, basically, or
Wow.
there was leftover and they didn't want it to go.
So those two were wildly different dishes.
Hey, I like haggis too. I'm one of the weird ones.
Okay. That I don't think that's caught on here. Am I wrong about that?
No, look, every culture has the lowest food of the poor, which involved innards, fat, and grain. And the idea was the most calories possible for the least money because you're poor, but you need some fuel before you go out plowing in the morning or whatever other physical labor you were doing. For the Scottish, it's a bladder, I guess, filled with oatmeal, spices, fat, and offal. Us Jews, we make something similar called kishka. Every culture has something like that. When I was working out of London, I covered, quote, the troubles, unquote, in Northern Ireland, which were obviously much more than trouble. And I used to fly a Northern Irish airline to get to Belfast from London. The flight left at 6 a.m. And it was an Irish airline, maybe even Northern Irish, but for some reason they served haggis for breakfast. Remember when they'd feed you on planes? They served haggis for breakfast at 6 a.m. Now, the thing they didn't serve with it was a dram of scotch, but they served haggis, and it was great.
And I guess here it would be a sausage biscuit.
Here it would be, well, no, it would be scrapple.
Okay.
It would be just stuff you'd never consider eating put together and served to you with some sort of binder.
What is it that takes a common food like a pizza, like a hot dog, like a hamburger, and regionalizes it? So is it the things that are available at the time?
The things that are available there. I mean, there's a St. Louis style pizza uses a cheese called Provel, which is a smoked, or it tastes of smoke. It may have liquid smoke in it. Processed cheese with, I am told, because I don't recall ever having it, a similarity to Swiss. Now, that ended up on that pizza because that's what they had. In Old Forge, Pennsylvania, a town I suspect you've never been to, the bar owner started making a pizza of her own for the coal miners when they came back from work at the end of the day. And I can't nail this down. It is apocryphal, but that pizza uses often brick cheese, which is good, kind of like the American cheese you'd get in the school food program. The allegation, I cannot prove it, and I tried real hard. The allegation has long been, the conventional wisdom has been, that they started using that because everyone in that region was poor and this government cheese was available. I don't know if that's true, but I love it as a story.
Yeah, that is a good story. Origin stories of how things came to be do fascinate me. And I know they fascinate you too, because you wrote a book documenting a lot of that.
Well, like the Reuben sandwich, you figure it came from a Jewish deli owner in New York, right? No, it came from a guy, I believe he was in Omaha, whose first name was Reuben. By the way, if you think closely, a Reuben's connection to the origins of the New York Jewish deli thing, if you will, I'm so well spoken. Those delis were originally Jewish and could not serve a combination of beef and cheese. So the concept of topping pastrami with Swiss cheese just didn't exist.
So then that was another version.
Yeah, everything evolves. Everything becomes a version of what it was. And nowadays, we're finally bringing some regional cuisines that we wouldn't touch in the past into the U.S. For example, all of our Mexican-American food, the traditional stuff, evolved from the food of the Norteño, the millions of people in the northern section of Mexico who one day in 1848 found out they were now American because we won the Mexican-American War and took half of their country. So now Mexican food was evolving from the cooking these people did, which was flour, not corn tortillas. Did it include seafood? Fish tacos actually evolved from an evolution in Mexico where a bunch of immigrant Japanese fishermen started basically doing a tempura thing on white fish, and that ended up as fish tacos. American Mexican came from the north, and over time, more regional dishes from other regions of Mexico have finally started making their way to the U.S. Right now, a dish called birria is quite popular. It's a stew that originated in central Mexico, mostly of goat. Long after the Mexican-American War, it eventually migrated to Tijuana in the form of beef made into particularly flat-top grilled tacos. That dish, birria, has now taken the country by storm from coast to coast. Mole, the same thing, born in the Puebla region. Now there's a great restaurant on Long Beach Island here on the Jersey Shore that makes incredible mole. The owner's mother-in-law is from Puebla. So we're starting to see an influx of other foods, although there are foods that will never, in my view, be popular enough to, in my opinion, be part of American cuisine. Vietnamese food is wonderful and available in many places, but it's not on the list of where should we go for lunch today. It's not available everywhere. It's still a little too exotic to some extent. The same is true of Thai food, which is an everyday item in New York or Los Angeles or Houston, but not an everyday option everywhere else. On the other hand, I think sushi is now an American food. It's available everywhere. You go to CVS, you go to sushi, and we've Americanized it. We've made it bigger. We've started using a tremendous number of sauces. None of that originally happened in Japan, although some of those things have migrated back to Japan. You can get a California roll, an American invention, in some places in Japan now. On the other hand, you can also get, I think it's Domino's, might be Pizza Hut. One of them is big in Japan. Big enough, in fact, that for those who celebrate Christmas, or perhaps even those who don't, a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken is considered a Christmas dish. And I kind of jumped from sushi to chicken, from pizza to chicken, but we're throwing some of this stuff back.
Well, that brings me to where you see things headed, because my sense of things when I go to the grocery store right now, just to get the basic things, it seems like there is a big push to take foods that we love that have been considered junk food or unhealthy and make them all of a sudden plant-based so they feel more healthy.
Yeah, but there's no real science on whether they are more healthy. First of all, they're incredibly processed. No one has done the scientific analysis on what the processing A does to you, or B, what it does to the environment. No analysis of the carbon footprint of making an Impossible Burger, not to single them out. Yes, there's a notable goal here, theoretically, of reducing methane emissions, but I don't see enough people eating Impossible Burgers in the short term to get rid of the cow methane problem. My view is this: eat in a way that you enjoy. If you like meat, there's no joy in eating fake meat. I mean, if you want to be a vegetarian, figure out how to do the best taste things with vegetables. The problem with so many, especially high-end, supposedly vegetarian or vegan places, is that they're using vegetables to taste like something else. That's stupid.
That's my big problem with it.
I mean, look, you want to
make it what it is.
I'll even stop short of requiring organic because, first of all, there's, I think, a lot of fraud in the labeling of organic items. Secondly, I'm a long way from being concerned all day about pesticides. I know I should be, but when organic production makes things taste better, great. But yeah, if you love vegetables, eat vegetables. If you love meat, eat meat. Look, and I can say this a million times, the proper size for protein, and we're audio only, I guess, so I'm holding my fist up to the camera few of you can see, but your protein on your plate should not be more than the size of your fist. And vegetables should be the majority of food on your plate, but not in a way that forces you necessarily to give up animal protein.
Yeah.
Look, there's questions anyway about the validity of the take it for granted assertion that what you eat contributes to your cholesterol level. An increasing number of scientists saying it's unrelated. It doesn't matter what my weight is. I was at 265. Now I'm at 185. I could still lose another 20. My cholesterol levels don't change. I still have to take medication. That's just my body.
What do you see changing with the food habits?
Very little. We talk a great game about eating healthy, but we sure eat a lot of fast food, convenience food. And yeah, from time to time we'll make a nod at it, but how many people are willing to spend the money to go to a real butcher shop and buy a good piece of beef as opposed to the admittedly not the best stuff available at most supermarkets. Few people do. How many people buy a rotisserie chicken? I do, because it's good to have in the fridge to be able to pick at some white meat as opposed to something bad for me. But even I, who espouse this, don't follow my own advice of roasting a chicken every week. Roasting a chicken is the simplest thing in the world. Salt, pepper, garlic, 500 degrees in an oven. Pour some stock in so it doesn't dry out. Put it in there for 40 minutes. Take it out. You've just cooked. And I often say to people, just cook good food. I mean, especially the cheap stuff. There's nothing better than a tough cut of meat that has been braised to tender. There's nothing better. You know, when people go out, a big dish, a dish that does well in restaurants is short ribs. It's got immensely deep flavor, and it seems somehow exotic. Well, it's not. Here's what you do. Saute some onions in a pot with oil. Then you throw in short ribs, and you rotate them to get a little sear on them. And then you add some cans of crushed tomatoes, usually 2 large cans, a box of a broth of any kind to make sure you keep your liquid level up, because when you braise, you have to totally cover the meat. Then salt, pepper, garlic, cumin if you want. Turn that flame down as low as it will go and walk away. Every 30 minutes, stir it. After 4 hours, dinner's ready. And it's the greatest thing on earth. Now, I'm going to say something totally insane. Read the back of a package of instant mashed potatoes. Nothing bad in there. They're just dried mashed potatoes. So not everything that's a convenience food is bad for you. I'd rather make the mashed myself. But if it's late in the day and I forgot to do it, it takes me 30 seconds to heat up some water and make those mashed potatoes, and they make the most perfect base. And you can eat well. As I said, I've been losing weight. My diabetes numbers are great now. This is one of my go-to dishes. And this beef is not particularly high in calories. Certainly it gets lower when you remove a bunch of the fat. Although, let's be honest, fat is flavor, so I don't argue with anyone who wants to remove all of it, because that's pretty awful. But you don't need to be trained. And by the way, I've been happily married for 31 years, so this doesn't apply to me. But gentlemen, if you're looking to impress a woman, just make dinner. The first time I went to my wife's apartment, obviously we're not married yet, and I'm looking around and I open the fridge. And remember, this is New York, so it's just full of takeout boxes. And I say to my wife, how do you eat? And she opened a drawer, and this being New York and pre-internet, it was just stacked up to here with those menus that people put on your door in apartment buildings in New York. And she can cook. It's just not for her the hobby or even vocation that it is for me. But she eats well.
She eats well.
It's so simple. You take a bag of frozen shrimp. And by the way, all of the shrimp you get in the U.S., whether it's in a bag that says frozen or it's at the fish counter, it's almost all been frozen because it didn't come from here. If you want fresh shrimp here, you better be on the Gulf Coast. There's no other place to get it. And I'm so lazy, peeled raw shrimp. Put them in a thing of warm water for a couple hours. I'll throw them in a pan with a little olive oil, a shit ton of garlic, and just keep that going. Throw in some lemon, top some bucatini or even plain old spaghetti with that. That meal took you 10 minutes, and it's extraordinary. You can cook.
That leads me to the buying habits of people. One thing I'm a little concerned about is this culture of just ordering your food. There's so many places that can go to a restaurant, any kind of restaurant, and pick it up for you, bring it to your door.
Well, that becomes a financial issue.
Well, I guess my concern is, at what point do restaurants begin getting smaller and smaller, and then at some point they just don't exist outside of it?
Let me argue with you on that. There was a belief during and after the pandemic that the concept of ghost kitchens, which were restaurants without bricks and mortar, they became a brand online, Fred's House of Spuds, and they could sell you potatoes. Fred's House of Spuds selling you every kind of loaded baked potato. And the idea was, you don't have to pay for waiters, you don't have to pay for front of the house, and you could run 4 or 5 virtual restaurants out of this same kitchen. It was assumed by very smart people that this was the future. Well, no, it wasn't. The ghost kitchen inventory is dropping because one of the conundrum after lockdown ended, people wanted to get the hell out of the house. They've gone back to restaurants. Now, there's been a huge increase overall in orders to go. And to the point where one expert was telling me, you'll see mom or dad after school behavior these days is often A, pick up the kids, B, pick up their meals, C, even stopping at multiple quick service restaurants to do it. And you're seeing the QSRs, McDonald's, Popeyes, they are feeling some significant pressure now from two places. Convenience stores, which have started actually cooking food, and grocery stores, which are increasingly becoming what was called the grocerant. I mean, half the traffic, I am told, at Whole Foods during dinner hours, people picking up meals to take home. Convenience remains at the top of America's totem pole for how to eat on a regular basis.
Okay. If you were going to take the whole country as a whole, is there one type of food, if you want to say Asian, Mexican, any of that, that dominates?
Well, I haven't seen numbers since the pandemic. The old saw used to be that there are as many Chinese restaurants in America as, and then you'd name 3 or 4 brands of fast food combined. Okay. On the other hand, Chinese restaurants have traditionally been handed down through the generations in America, and increasingly, as parents or grandparents have become successful in that business, which is a tough business, they've wanted better for their children. So you see less of a succession story continuing with Chinese American restaurants, and I don't know where that's going to go. I do know that the region represented among Chinese cooks has increasingly moved away from Canton and into places like Hunan, Sichuan. There's one other province that I'm embarrassed to say escapes me because it's arguably on the rise faster than any other Chinese region. Chinese Mexican pizza, I would argue, I guess, that if I were to pick one all-American food, it would be pizza. Because it's just so thoroughly inculcated our society as an everyday dish with local variants a billion different ways. And it's something about which people are tremendously passionate.
Fiercely. I mean, you could lose a lot of friends if you get online and start talking about pineapple and ham on a pizza. You can, yeah. Right.
I'm sorry, I can't go there. On the other hand, if you like pineapple and ham, then all I would ask you is to make the pizza well with pineapple and ham. And I don't know enough to answer this, but are you better off with canned pineapple, which I presume has an added level of sweetness, or fresh pineapple? I mean, we're so used to fake flavors now that we often prefer them over real flavors. I mean, a real key lime pie is much more subtle in both flavor and color than the key lime pies most Americans like, which are some god-awful neon shade like from behind me, and insane sweetness. Here's a great one. Peach ice cream made at home is an absolute friggin' delight. First of all, it ain't orange. It's a tinge of yellow at best. Secondly, the pieces, the flavor is much more subtle than the flavor of commercially produced peach ice cream, but it's a whole lot better.
And that's likely the way it is with a lot of things. If you take out the overuse of salt, if you take out the overuse of sugar.
Yeah, but you got to be careful because remember, as a society, if you own a restaurant, we have created a culture that is addicted to salt and sugar. Not because someone's in a back alley shooting it up, but because after decades, nay, more than a century, of emphasizing flavors like that, which really burst onto your taste buds, we've created an expectation of what certain food should taste like. I think it was Shake Shack that tried when they started to make French fries from scratch. I think it was Shake Shack. It was one of the better burger chains. And then found out very quickly the customers didn't like them. And they had to go back to frozen fries because that's what people are used to. So, okay, that's what you want. That's what you get.
Well, we've gone from pineapple on pizza to I want to just piss off some more folks and get your opinion.
All right.
We're going to settle this once and for all. If you're in Philly and you want the best cheesesteak, where do you go?
Well, first of all, I live 90 minutes from Philly, so I'm not an expert.
Okay.
Second, the folks who know what they're talking about seem to point people toward John's, which is actually a roast pork place. And I would
Okay.
also argue that the roast pork sandwich, which may have started at John's, I'm not sure, that's the true sandwich for native Philadelphia. That is pork tenderloin, roasted beautifully, served on crisp but soft inside Italian bread from, I think, Amoroso. I never remember if it's Amoroso or Amorosa, so its pronouns are up to you. Served with provolone cheese on it, melted, and broccoli rabe that's been sauteed in garlic. That is the great Philly sandwich. As I see it, I make it at home frequently. You know, Pat's, Geno's, they're fine for cheesesteaks. I'm not a big fan of a cheesesteak because, frankly, I think whatever cheese you use tends to impart more salt to the ultimate product than I enjoy. You know, it's personal taste. It's a fine product. I mean, it's made from top round. The secret to a cheesesteak, you know, is that they freeze the top round a little bit so that they can slice it even thinner than if it were sitting at room temperature. And slicing, you know, it's so important. It's important in lox. It's important in so many things. But that's the secret to a good cheesesteak.
I've never been to John's, so now I have a field trip assigned.
Yeah, well, go ahead and make it first. Grab yourself a tenderloin. Here's what you do. Don't grab one of those branded ones that has flavorings in. Grab your basic pork tenderloin, salt, pepper, cumin, put it in a hot pan with a little bit of stock to keep it moist. Put it in a 425 oven for 20 to 30 minutes. Absolutely the best.
Okay. Well, that is my next assignment. Sure.
You know, I'm thinking about it. I may make that for dinner tonight.
Well, this has been a really great and insightful conversation. I appreciate learning about food. I love food, so I appreciate learning about it. And
What's your favorite food?
my favorite food is pizza, without
Where?
a doubt. Wherever has the thinnest crust.
Oh, you're a thin crust guy. A bar pie, like cracker? Well, then you want to go to Star Taverns in New Jersey. One of the Oranges has a place called Star Tavern that serves probably
right.
the greatest tavern pie on earth. And,
Okay.
you know, pizza's such a bizarre thing. You can say it's the best here. Good pizza's good pizza, and they can all be very different.
Yes, they can. That's what I love about it, because if I do go somewhere and it's a thicker crust and the toppings are great.
Well, it depends how it's made. I mean, look, I hung out with Tony Gemignani, a multiple international pizza competition winner, when he was teaching pizza school in San Francisco. Tony's got a variety of ovens so that he can properly do a variety of styles, because they require different temperature, different cook time, different this, different that. The problem with a lot of pizzerias is they try to do various pizzas in incorrect ovens. And there's an interesting change going down in New York. There's been an environmental regulation put into effect, I think it's statewide in New York, which limits the emissions that you can produce from a bakery. And that means a bunch of these places using wood-fired ovens, which is traditional in New York, are having to switch to electric. Now, it's doable. You can actually replicate the conditions of a wood-fired oven in a proper electric oven done properly, but that's a huge change.
Yeah, that's a big shift. Well, David, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks for having me, dude. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. What's the best way for people to connect with you and get a copy of your book?
Well, a copy of my book, go to Amazon. To connect with me, number of ways. I have a website for my production company, which is called pageprod.com. You can also go to Food Americana. You can also go directly to my own Facebook, David Page. Take a look at my website. It'll show you some of the book. It's got a link to the book, actually, and it's got some of my other work there, including, let me plug this, my upcoming podcast to start shortly called Culinary Characters Unlocked, in which I interview not just known, but in some way or other impactful people in the world of food. Drew Nieporent, who started Nobu. Dan Barber, probably the most inventive farm-to-table chef in America. Nancy Silverton, who is a legend in L.A. Even Marvin Lender of the Lender Brothers, who first produced frozen bagels. Those are the kinds of folks I'm talking to. So look for that in the near future on all the major podcast platforms, he said. Massive pitch time and hoping it gets through your final edit.
It absolutely will. And it will also be in the show notes as soon as there is a link to make available for it. And again, I thank you for taking the time to be here with us today and impart your wisdom.
It's knowledge I've picked up. I'm not sure I've graduated to full wisdom yet, but I'm trying. Thanks again.
Thanks so much for joining me today. And if you have an extra minute, I have a favor to ask. Some of you listen to this show on Apple Podcasts, and a lot of you I talk to are on Spotify or Amazon. I'd love it if you would take just a second to leave a rating or a review. It lets the platforms know that listeners are getting value from the show and suggest it to others who are interested in similar content. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a guest suggestion, or just general feedback, I'd love to hear about that too. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at ajoyfulrebellion.com.